Hello and welcome to our discussions on understanding the financial statements. We'll continue our financial statement analysis by taking the examples of three different airlines of three different countries, namely Singapore Airlines, Jet Airways and British Airways. And in this session we will try to find answers to these questions. Are these companies using non-current sources to finance their business? And do they have the ability to meet their long-term obligations? We have already seen the liquidity positions, and we saw that the current liabilities and working capital positions have been analyzed in our previous session. In this session, we will try to pick up a concept called capital employed first and calculate the capital employed. Capital employed is the long-term debts and equity. It is a summation of the equity and debt. So non-current liabilities and equity. Non-current liabilities and equity. So we can see that the capital employed of Singapore Airlines has been increasing in the last 3 years. In the process, we can also observe that 76% of the assets of Singapore Airlines are financed by the capital employed, and all through the 4 years the capital employed, or in other words the long-term source, has contributed to the extent of more than 75% of the total assets. Let us see what is happening in Jet Airways. In case of Jet Airways, the capital employed has contributed to the extent of 45% in 2013, and it has gradually come down from 74% to 45% over these 3 years. So Jet Airways financing by the long-term sources has come down from 74 to 45, whereas in case of Singapore Airlines it has increased and has maintained above 75%. In case of British Airways, also the capital employed contributed around 44% in 2013, 49% in 2012 and 48% in 2011. What is the composition of this capital employed? We have seen that capital employed consists of the equity and non-current liabilities. Now let us see the composition of these two and understand which particular component has changed over this period. In case of British Airways, the long-term liabilities has decreased from 44% of the total assets to 28%. So the long-term liabilities of British Airways as the total assets contribution to a total asset has come down. On the other hand, the equity financing has gone up from 4 to 16%. So though overall capital employed as a percentage of the total assets remains same in the range of 45 to 48, the composition of the capital employed has changed over this period, and it is it's a positive thing to observe that equity financing of British Airways has increased over these 3 years. In case of Jet Airlines or Jet Airways, the equity is negative in the last year, and the long-term liabilities to the total assets have gone up has been significantly high, though it has come down from 62 to 47. So that means the company is now depending more on the current liabilities. We can see that the dependence of Jet Airlines or Jet Airways is high on the current liabilities and has been reducing on the long-term sources. So the dependence of current liabilities we saw may not be in the interest of the overall profitability of the company. In case of Singapore Airlines, we can see that the Singapore Airlines has a quite a significant percentage of the total assets have been financed by equity. This is completely different from Jet Airways and the British Airways. In case of British Airways, the percentage contribution of equity to the total asset is less than 20%. In case of Jet Airlines is actually negative in the last year, whereas Singapore Airlines is throughout these 4 years, the equity financing is very high. So that means Singapore Airlines is an out and out equity driven company, which we can also see the equity of the company. The equity of the company, that is Singapore, has actually been increasing because of the retained earnings. The retained earnings of the company has been positive throughout, whereas in Jet Airways the retained earnings of the reserves have been negative in the last 2 years. In case of British Airways, the retained earnings has also increased in these 2 years. So the dependence on the long-term liabilities or the long-term sources is very high in case of Singapore Airlines, and in case of Singapore Airlines a significant part of the long-term sources is coming from the equity. So therefore the debt equity ratio of Singapore Airlines all through these 4 years is less than 1. In case of the Jet Airways, it is very high debt equity ratio, and in the last year it doesn't make any sense because it's a negative equity company. And British Airways, the debt equity ratio is also more than 1, and in 2011 and 12 is in fact very high, and 2013 the debt equity ratio has come down because the equity has gone up, and we can see that equity has gone up because of the profits, and also negative equity has come down. The negative equity has come down means there may be some unrealized profits which the company might have transferred to the balance sheet. So though all the 3 companies belong to the same industry, the composition of the capital sources or the sources of finance is not same. In case of Singapore Airlines, it is an out and out equity driven company. We can see that it's an out and out equity driven company, and the debt equity ratio is all through less than 1. In case of Jet Airways, it's a loss making company, so the equity has become negative and debt equity ratio is unusually high. In case of British Airways, though it is not negative, the debt equity ratio has improved towards equity over a period of time. However, there is a need to understand how this negative equity has come down. We have to examine the composition of this equity, which we'll pick up in the next session. Thank you very much.